Morning.
Morning.
My name is Devyn Gamez, and this is my grandfather, Morrison. And today I'm going to be interviewing him about his life in the early 1970s and his time during the Vietnam War, and how it was like being a principal in elementary school, junior high, and in high school. And today, my first question is, what made you join the Army at such a young age?
Well, in 1966, I've been out of high school for 2 years. I graduated from high school in 1964, and I went right to college.
Yeah.
And I was playing football for the college I was going to. It was called Menlo College. It was a small private boys' school in the San Mateo area. And I blew out my knee in one of the games.
Oh, really?
And I was terribly disappointed and despondent about that, so I quit school and went to work.
Mm-hmm.
And I went back to college in February of 1965, and I spent a year in college at College of San Mateo, which was a junior college. I really didn't know why I was there. I was just sort of moping around, taking classes and watching the girls, and that's about it. You know, I didn't really have any direction, so I decided to quit school and join the Army.
Did you, were you familiar with anybody when you joined the Army, or did you just go,
My brother was in the Army. He was 8 years older than me, and he had a good experience. He was in military intelligence, and I volunteered, requested to go into military intelligence like he did.
Well, so where were you deported first? Like, what was your first experience?
Well,
traveling?
When I was inducted into the Army, it was in the Alameda Air Station in the San Francisco area. I was sworn in. I went to basic training at Fort Polk, Louisiana, and I was there from the end of May until the end of July in basic training. Hot, red dirt, armadillos, and rattlesnakes.
Wow, so tough.
Tough time, and it was real hot because
Yeah.
it was the summer.
When was your first time leaving the United States in the military?
I was after I got out of the basic training in Fort Polk, I went to secondary training in military intelligence in Baltimore, Maryland, and there was a small intelligence fort there, and that's where the school was.
Mm-hmm.
Following that, we were all nervous about where we were going to go. Were we going to go to Vietnam? Because this is 1966. The war was very, very busy. They were drafting a lot of young men and women to go into the military, 70,000 a month.
Mm-hmm.
And we were nervous where we were headed.
Yeah.
When I got my assignment, I was assigned to go to Germany.
Yes.
And I was one of the whole class, except 2 soldiers. We all went to Germany for assignment in the military intelligence over there.
Really?
Uh-huh.
What was the experience like being in Germany, and what was
It
different?
was terrific. We loved it. I mean, I wanted to go.
Mm-hmm.
I had an opportunity to go to Germany and travel and stuff. When I got there, where I got my assignment, it was into the 66th Intelligence Group, and I was assigned to the 165th MI Company, stationed in Frankfurt.
Really? So what was the lifestyle in Germany? What was it different? How was it different there?
Well, obviously the language is different. My heritage is German. My grandmother immigrated with her family to the United States with 11 of 12 children and mother and father. One child, the oldest girl, her name was Rose, and she lived in Germany still, and she decided not to immigrate to the country. Mm-hmm. So we have family there.
Huh. And one of the things I want to ask you is, what was it like being a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Germany? Or when did you get into?
Well, it was interesting because when I was in Germany, I wasn't a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I was just a kid. I was 19, 20 years old, and the world was at my feet. One of the first things I did was I bought a car, because the car set me free. And I could, when I had time off, I could go. I could leave because I had a car. But my church activity was basically non-existent at that time because I wasn't a member of any church.
What age did you get into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints?
After I got out of the Army, I met a young woman who, when I was 22, and she was a member of the church. And well, I knew that, but that didn't influence me too much. I liked her, and ultimately we got married. But I still wasn't a member of the church. I did that later.
Later towards when you...
I joined the church 11 years after I got married, which was in I think about 1982. Mm-hmm. And you might ask me, I guess the question would be, well, why did you wait so long? I said, well, I just didn't have the testimony to be a member of the church. That came later.
I can understand.
Yeah.
One thing I would like to know is, like, I wasn't back in that time to understand and really feel how it was like being a soldier coming back to your home state country.
Yeah.
During the Vietnam War. What was it like coming back?
It was tough. It was tough. I remember coming home at the time. The soldiers were not looked on very favorably, and the news was terrible. There was a lot of after I'd gotten home, there had been a lot of demonstrations in the United States. When I got home in April of 1969, there was a lot of hate, anger, and frustration. I was actually a part of it because I was in Germany the whole time, doing my job and wearing a uniform. I came home and I saw this and saw the discontent, and I kind of wondered what's going on, and here we are, there's soldiers dying over in a country that's far, far away, and we have people that are spitting on soldiers and stuff. Mm-hmm. So it was really hard. I didn't understand it, but I went back to college. As soon as I got out of the Army, I went back to school in the summer of 1969, and because I had decided what I wanted to do when I got out. That's one of the main things that happened to me while I was gone. I had made a decision on what to do with my life, and before that, I had not a clue. I knew what I was going to do when I got out because I was now 22, and I decided I wanted to go back to college. I wanted to become a school teacher, and I wanted to get married and have a family. At that point, that was about all I could cope with.
Yeah.
So I found the opportunity to do that.
Okay. Was it, another thing I wanted to ask you is, was it safe being in Germany at the time? Did you get ridiculed at all by the other countries around you? Was there any scary experience?
Well, I can answer that easily enough. I was in Germany in 1967 when the Israeli-Arab War started in the Far East. That's when Israel invaded Egypt, and it was very tense that time because the Soviet Union, at that time Germany was divided, and the Soviet Union was controlling East Germany, and there was a wall and fence that split the whole country in half. And there's all these German tanks, East German tanks, Russian run, on the one side of the fence, and the American forces and the NATO forces on the other side. And the NATO forces were outnumbered about 100 to 1.
Wow.
So it was tense times. There was another time when, in 1968, when the Russians were doing maneuvers in then Czechoslovakia. And they were doing their maneuvers. It was part of Czechoslovakia was part of the Eastern Bloc of the Soviet Union. And the maneuvers were being done, and the maneuvers decided to end it, and the Soviets and the tanks were leaving on a weekend. And during the night, the Soviet tanks turned around, came in, and had a bloodless coup, and they threw out the leader of Czechoslovakia, whose name was Alexander Dubček. That during those moments, the military intelligence company I was a part of was directly involved in watching over the military intelligence mission of the Soviets that had an office, a compound in Frankfurt, Germany, where I was stationed. And we kind of kept an eye on what they were doing, and it was very tense.
Yeah.
There was some efforts that weren't decided what to do, and were the Soviets going to make a move and come into East Germany, into West Germany, I should say. It was very tense. And that during that time, we just didn't see what was happening. To add to that piece, I was over in Germany from 1966 in September until 1969 in April when I came home. There was always the hanging over our heads the possibility of us being transferred to Vietnam. That hung over our heads and was an emotional challenge for all of us, because we didn't know whether one day from the next that we'd get a call up to get shipped to Vietnam. Yeah. Not that we were sure about going, because we were soldiers. We did what we were told. A lot of young men volunteered to go over to Vietnam. I wasn't sure why they did that. I had a couple of friends that did it. They got bored being in Europe. And I couldn't understand that at all. I had my car, I could go where I wanted, and I had enough time off, and I had enough money to be able to do things. I was having a great time. Wow. Learned a lot, saw a lot of territory, saw a lot of country, enough so that I decided I'd love to come back after I got out of the Army.
What was the culture like? Was it a huge cultural shock?
Oh yeah, no, not a cultural shock at all. I learned to speak a little German, enough to be able to communicate with the Frauleins, and they have streets, and Germany is a very complex economy and stuff, but they were a war-ravaged country just 20 years before I got there. Yeah. And they had been rebuilding, and they were a democracy and elected, but you can still see the damage done by the war when you travel around. Yeah. You can see bullet holes in buildings. It was amazing.
Wow. When you were stationed there in Germany at the time, and when it was divided, the Soviet Union had the one half, and it was on the other side, did you ever come across that possibly another World War III started? Or was it that intense?
There was always that threat, because it was divided. There was the division between the two NATO and the powers run by the Soviet Union. There was always the threat, and there was always the nuclear threat, because the Soviet Union had nuclear weapons, and so did the United States, and those weapons were always a threat to be used. So, they were, before I left to go into the Army, they were building bunkers in the United States. People were buying bunkers to build fallout shelters in case there was a nuclear attack.
From being in the Army, did you learn any life lessons that has helped you in your life today?
Well, sure. That's where I really grew up. From the time I was 19 till the time I was 22. I grew up and made decisions, just saw that, there was a time when I had an opportunity to get promoted, and I thought maybe I'll stay in the military. But I thought through that, and then I decided I didn't want to do that. later on, I came back and rejoined the military back in 1986. I joined the reserve, but that's another story we'll talk about perhaps.
Yeah. And all right, so you just got out of the Army. You went back to college. What was the university? What was the name?
I got out of the Army in April of 1969. I came home. I got a part-time job, and in June I started back to school at a junior college called Kenyatta Junior College. I spent a year there, summer school, and then the following year I was a student, and I received an associate arts degree for a 2-year degree. And I got into university at California State University at Chico, and I've got into a teaching preparation program. It was a 5-year program, but I already had 2 years in, and so for the next 3 years, my then wife and I spent living in Chico. Went to school and had a fun life in college life. Been a nice married couple, and we enjoyed it. Chico is in Northern California.
What led you to go into teaching? Like, what really motivated you to that's exactly
I really don't know. I wasn't a good student in high school. I didn't like most of my teachers because they didn't like me because I was kind of a tough teach. I had some experiences with teachers that weren't friendly. Some of them I didn't like, and I let them know it. I didn't do that. But I don't know. I just, discovered that something, maybe they need a better teacher. And I thought I'd be one. And I was. And I enjoyed it. I loved teaching. And did the teaching part for 9 years. And in 1981, I had advanced myself, and I got a principal certification, and I got a job as an assistant principal working in the Bethel School District in Washington State.
Where was your very first teaching job? Where was that located?
It was in Moscow, Idaho. I got a job as a first-year teacher teaching U.S. history.
How did you enjoy that?
I loved it. I had great kids. The history part was broken into 6 different phases. One phase started in the early history of the United States, progressed forward, and then it went into some ethnic groups. The people that lived in the ghettos in the big cities, the Italian ghettos, and the Irish ghettos. Then there were some portions about government. Then there's some portions about manifest destiny, about the decline and conflict between the American Indians and the United States. And then it went into the next part of the last part was kind of going into the situation regarding the Vietnam War. That was a big piece because that was important. 50,000 plus young men and women died in the Vietnam War.
What was your favorite topic talking about in the school?
Oh gosh, I loved government. It was really liked it. My wife and I spent 3 years in Moscow, and at that time we made a decision that I applied to teach overseas because we wanted to go back to Germany. And I got a job teaching in Germany. And we had our second child on the way. We had our firstborn, which is your mother, and she came with us. And we lived in Germany for 2 years. Your mother went to German schools, and at that time she was about 3 years old. And and the German schools, they spoke German. They didn't speak English. And she went in there and did her thing and did very well. And then we came home after 2 years, and I got a job teaching in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and I taught psychology and history, American history, U.S. history, and psychology.
What was different teaching in Germany than coming back to the United States?
The only difference is availability of materials.
Yeah.
It was a brand new high school, 7th grade through 12th grade, and getting materials. Because when I started teaching there that first year, there was a new school, didn't have any textbooks for American history or for U.S. government. So that was the most difficult part. Kids were great. They were many of them spoke the language because it just had been there for a while. They just spoke the language a little bit. I learned to speak German better because I'm back in the second time. I loved it, and we could travel around a little bit. Remember, we had a young family because your Aunt Haley was born over there, and so your mom was around, and we just couldn't travel as much.
So you're teaching, and now you want to become a principal.
Yeah. I found teaching very rewarding. I loved the kids. However, I needed to make a little more money. I had a family coming up and had 2 children, and it was time to make a little more money. And so I applied for some principal's jobs, and I was offered one in Spanaway, Washington at Bethel High School to be the assistant principal. It was a great opportunity for me. I enjoyed the school. It was a rural school, kind of in a rural area, turning into I'm trying to think of what I can say. Developing into a bigger school district. It was at the time the largest school district in the state. Covered 210 square miles.
Wow.
Had 2 high schools. So there's a lot of territory, but not a whole lot of people.
Do you have any fun stories of being a principal? Any interesting ones you were like, wow, that was a fun experience?
Boy, I'll tell you. It was very rewarding in that my principal style was to be a principal who was for the kids. I had to make some hard decisions, but one time, probably the most funny story was I had a young man that I had learned to really appreciate and liked him because he was kind of a little bit off to the side and did goofy things, but he was a nice guy. One day I walked into the cafeteria and he was over in the corner and he hosted up a bottle of beer. And I looked at it, another one. So he hosted up this bottle of beer, and I thought, okay. So I went over to talk to him. I said, "What do you got there?" He said, "It's not really beer. It's non-alcoholic beer." And he said, "Really?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Did you know though that the non-alcoholic beer does have alcohol in it, don't you?" "No, it does." I said, "Come on with me." So we come in and come to the office. I said, "No, you can be suspended from school for drinking alcohol at school." "Oh no." He said, "Oh gosh." So I had these test strips that show alcohol in liquids. So I dipped it in that beer and it turned purple, which means it had alcohol in it. You should have seen his face. I said, "I'm going to have to kick you out of school." He said, "I know." He was just terribly disappointed, and I kicked him out of school for 3 days because that was the minimum you could be out for drinking at school. But he learned a very valuable lesson. And he and I, he went out, he said, his parents were disappointed and all that stuff. And I said, "But it's one of those things you learn by experience." And that's, I guess, the one thing I can say about it. I wanted the young people I worked with to learn. Some of the saddest things, we had a young man who was going to graduate from high school. He was a kind of a troubled kid, but a nice guy. Worked hard in school and didn't do very well because he had some outside issues and stuff. And he went to a graduate, did some partying before graduation and was killed.
Oh gosh.
Pardon?
Yeah,
he was killed in an accident, and we were all just brokenhearted. You don't realize that. You don't think that graduating from high school, everybody's excited, but that's a real dangerous time because they do some goofy things. I did some goofy things when I was a senior in high school. Nothing like that crazy thing. So, but still did some silly things. You make some wrong decisions. So there's a couple things. Some of them kind of joyful, but enlightening, where it's a lesson well learned, and some that are tragic and the family is devastated.
When did you come out of being a principal? Where did you go after that?
I mean, when I retired?
Well, when did you join the Army Reserves?
Oh, why and why?
And why, yeah.
Yeah. I joined the Army Reserves in 1986. How I did that was a real fluke. We had the Army recruiters coming to our high school to interview and talk to kids and invite them to join the military. We had the Air Force, the Army, the Marines, the Navy. They all came to talk to kids to see when they graduated from high school they could get into the service. I talked to one of the NCOs who was there, and he invited me to come to one of their evening meetings. And at the time, I was feeling a lot of pressure from school. It's a hard job being an assistant principal, or a principal. They're all difficult jobs. And so I went to the meeting, and I listened to what he had to say. And at the time, I thought, this might be a good opportunity for me to make a little extra money, because I still needed to make some more money, but also do something a little different, one weekend a month, to ease kind of the stress and strain of the schools. And so that's kind of why I joined back up. I decided that, if I stay for 20 years or more, I can get a retirement check for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And I'm currently now enjoying the fruits of those years that I spent in the Army Reserves, now that I'm retired. Every month I get a retirement check. And it's nice.
Yeah, I bet. When did you join the LDS Church?
I joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in 1982. I've been Nancy, my wife, has been a member of the church her entire life. And she's a wonderful woman. And her family has a long history as members of the church, going back to the very first beginning of the church, when Joseph Smith had his first vision. I'm not going to go into all that stuff, but he had his first vision, and Nancy's family, the first vision started when he was 13 or 14, I think. And they go back that far. So she has a long history as a member of the church. One of her grandfathers was a prophet in the church. And I had gone to church with her during our marriage, and even though I wasn't a member, I met a lot of wonderful people.
Yeah.
And so it just kind of came upon me, I met all these people, I learned more about how the church worked, and what it really is, the deal is you just develop a testimony that, that this is what you need to do, the church is true, that there's a lot of work to do, because you got to read a lot, and you got to find out what's really going on and how it works and all that. You could read every day, all day, 24 hours a day, and still not get all the stuff read that you need to know. So, it's a growing process. Am I where I need to be today? Have I read everything? No. Am I in the process of learning? Yes. It's a process of learning your whole life. Yes.
Yeah,
once you make a commitment, if you make a commitment, you need to make the commitment.
Stick to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you see any changes in the 1980s to today, 2020, in the church? Any different things that have come?
Well, I think some of the main thing that's changing is we are growing so fast. I mean, obviously people know about the missionaries that are around the world talking about and introducing the gospel of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to the rest of the non-members. We are a Christian church. It's a Christian church. We acknowledge Jesus Christ as our Lord and Savior, and we acknowledge Joseph Smith as the young man who brought the church back to the world. Okay? And I think that's the main thing, is that the fact that it's growing, a lot of people, and but one of the greatest things that the church has, along with the gospel, is the fact that it has an incredible group of people that go out, and when there's natural disasters throughout the world, one of the first groups of people that come to help is the efforts that the church puts forth in providing, I'm trying to think of the word, providing help, coming in and doing help with natural disasters.
Oh, that's wonderful. Being in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, have you come across of anything that you disagree with to your advice?
You know, it's a church. I mean, they don't. There's things that that I don't understand because I haven't read enough. Usually, when I come across something that I don't understand or maybe I disagree with, I need to find out more so I understand it better. Yeah. Because when you're in the process of learning, you don't know a lot of stuff. So basically, if you're a smart person, which I believe I am, I need to read more. And so the practice of going to church is one thing. Going to Sunday school and learning the gospel, taking part in the activities and doing those things that we do. When you go through the priesthood, there's levels of the priesthood that you can go through. I happen to be a high priest, but I've gone through the levels of becoming a high priest. And what does that do? That means I have some roles in the church that I'm able to do based upon being worthy. One of the things that's important in the church is church attendance. It's important, but you know they just take you down. They don't know. But as far as learning things, they're left up to you. You know, if you want to read the Book of Mormon from cover to cover once a year, every year for the rest of your life, you'll always learn something new. If you don't want to read the Book of Mormon every day for the rest of your life, if you don't want to read all of the Book of Mormon, that's up to you.
Yeah. So now, coming back to when you were in the Army Reserves, I was wondering, when you were a Mormon, did that affect you in any way of going to church? Did you?
No,
or anything?
not at all.
Nothing.
You go to church on Sunday. I had an opportunity. I could go to a non-denominational church if there wasn't a church, LDS church around. But there are usually a lot around. But there were some circumstances when I went to the non-denominational church, Christian church, on Fort Lewis, Washington, because I couldn't get off the post because I had some responsibilities, so I could break away for an hour to go to church. If I had longer time, I could go off post and go back to the regular ward and go to church. Yeah.
So now, all right, no problem. In today's world, the world we live in, would you tell me, would it be a good idea to join the service?
Well, it was the right thing for me. Although I went in the service during a very trying time, because the war was going on. The Vietnam War was going on, and we were killing people every day. And that's the first war, where you could watch the war of that day in your living room on TV, because Walter Cronkite was there, and they had people on the ground. It was a tough time.
Yeah.
But I went in the reserve during the time when we were having another conflicts going on in the Middle East, and that's going on today. We've lost thousands of young men and women, but that's what the military is about. You place your life on the line, but that's what policemen are all about. Yeah. That's what you're here to be a public servant to keep this country free. Then that's what it's all about, and you're basically willing to give your life and need to be, and you have to go in there with that in mind. Yeah. If you don't, then don't go in, because we have an all-volunteer army today. Yeah, back when I went in, back in 1966, you could get drafted. You just send you a letter and say, report to and such a date. And you'd serve 2 years. And there's a lot of objections to the draft, but that's the way it was. A lot of people left this country and went to Canada to get away from that. Yeah. So basically, my life as a soldier was good. I enjoyed it. There were times when I was saddened, when my fellow soldiers were hurt or injured or killed. But basically, it helped me develop to become the person that I am today.
Yeah. Well, Leigh, I appreciate your time for talking with us today, and hope you have a good day.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
grandson.